Hello, everyone. Pastor Howie, continuing our read through and thoughts from the Gospel of John. We are in, I was going to say we come to, but we are in chapter 15, the Gospel of John, the book of glory, as Jesus is preparing his disciples for his imminent arrest and ultimate crucifixion and burial, and then the promised resurrection. But I'm sure that the words Jesus has been saying to them in this section are challenging to them, confusing, some misunderstanding. Can't imagine what's going through their minds. As we come to the second section in chapter 15, which is entitled by the NIV, "The World Hates the Disciples." And that's from chapter 15, verses 18 through 25. So here we go. This is Jesus. This is not part of a conversation. This is Jesus' words entirely addressing the disciples, but it also addresses us. Never forget that with the exception of the fact that we're not called to be foundational apostles, and there are some things that Jesus taught the apostles that applied only to them, most of which what he teaches them here we see fulfilled and we find ourselves challenged by in 2023. So he's speaking to us. So take these words to heart. They're not my words, they're Jesus' words. And let's see what Jesus has to say about this world hating the disciples. "If the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first." Now, he's not necessarily at this point speaking universally, but the world in which they lived, the world into which Jesus was born, the world of Judea and Judean religion and tradition, the world of Samaria, the surrounding countries, the world of the Roman Empire, is essentially what he's referring to. And we can extrapolate that to 20 centuries later in 2023, the same thing. The world is the people who are under the influence of the world itself and its traditions and beliefs and lack of belief, its religiosity or its atheism, however it may be. And the world of politics, the world of power, the world of the flesh, the satisfaction of our own passions and hungers and appetites and fears and anxieties, not to mention the fact that even though Jesus defeated the devil at the cross, the devil is still allowed to roam about, as Peter says in 2 Peter, that he roams about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Peter knew that, we know that. But someday the devil will be cast away forever, never to challenge or tempt the new heavens and the new earth. But this is where we live, and we have to be honest with that. And this is how we are challenged. We are challenged every day by the world, the flesh, and the devil, and the world is not our friend. If the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. It hated Jesus. It hates Jesus. It hates the one true God. If you belonged to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world. As followers of Christ, we do not belong to the world. Unless we fall prey to the world, the flesh, and the devil, and compromise with the world, and become friendly with the world, and not true to the kingdom that we are citizens of. As it is, you do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world. He's called us to live outside the world, the flesh, and the devil. That is why the world hates you. The world hates that which it doesn't understand. The world hates that which does not agree with it, that which challenges its delusions and its deceit and its shortcoming. That's why the world hates you. Remember what I told you. A servant is not greater than his master. And that's basically a reference back to the first part of this whole section, begin at chapter 13, where Jesus is initially talking about and exemplifying to the disciples how they are to be servants like he served them, taking off his outer garment, taking a towel, a basin of water, and acting like the lowest servant in a household, the foot washer. The servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will persecute you also. Someone has once said that if we never know any sort of persecution, even if it's just our friends from our former life in the world turning against us, or if it's more severe, if we never know any persecution, perhaps the reason is we're living too much like the world, and the world can't tell that we're serving another king. And I still remember reading about Chinese Christians in secret house churches praying for the Western world of Christianity, the Western Christian world, that they would come to know some persecution so that the false Christians could be weeded out and the weak Christians could be strengthened. Because what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. But even in persecuted countries, death is not a real enemy, because if we are persecuted to death, as so many of our brothers and sisters even today still are, they're ushered into their reward immediately, passing from their body to the presence of Jesus Christ. But we should expect some sort of persecution. We should expect that people are going to turn away from us who are living according to the world and their flesh and the devil, because the two can't mix, at least not well. And one of the problems, what I believe, with the 21st century church in general is we've compromised too much. And we've tried to become too friendly with the world in order to perhaps win some. Trying to do what Paul did when he said, to the Jew I became like a Jew, to a Gentile I became like a Gentile, to the rich I became like rich, to the poor I became like poor, etc. And we take that in the wrong sense and try to become seeker friendly, when we should be welcoming to everybody and inviting to everyone. But do we really want to make ourselves and our church services look more and more like the world's forms of entertainment in order to perhaps influence somebody to come to a church service to then hear the gospel? Or are we going to be faithful to the gospel and faithful to what we understand from the Bible concerning our worship, the simplicity of singing hymns and psalms and hymns and spiritual songs and preaching, reading from the Word and preaching from the Word and doing what the Word teaches us to do? We need to wake up and think about these things. He goes on and says, if they, the people of the world, obeyed my teaching, they will obey yours also. And when you stop thinking about it, he said, or start to think about this, they will treat you this way because of my name, for they do not know the one who sent me. And I had a little insight as I read this over a few minutes ago to myself. When Jesus here is talking about the world, he's talking about a godless society, a godless culture that does not know the one who sent him. God sent his one and only Son into the world because he so loved the world that whoever believes in him, Jesus, may not perish but have everlasting life. But a godless world doesn't know the God who sent Jesus. So there is that separation that requires reconciliation and salvation. So, they treat you like this, for they do not know the one who sent me. They are, in effect, godless. If I had not come and spoken to them, they would not be guilty of sin, because when Jesus came, he exposed the sin of humankind. But now they have no excuse for their sin, because Jesus came. The Word who created the world became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory as of the one and only Son of God. Jesus has come. And in that sense, as the world rejected Jesus, they rejected God. And as they rejected God, they will reject the people of God, the true people of God. Whoever hates me hates my Father as well. If I had not done among them the works no one else did, they would not be guilty of sin. As it is, they have seen, and yet they have hated both me and my Father. But this is to fulfill what is written in their law. So in very pointed effect, Jesus is speaking, referring to the unbelieving Jews as part of the world that hates God, doesn't know God, is godless. For all their religion, all their tradition, godless. So this was written from the law to fulfill what Jesus is talking about. They hated me without reason. From Psalms 35:19 and repeated again in Psalm 69 verse 4. We ought not to go out looking to stir the world up so they'll hate us. We just need to follow the way, the truth, and the life of Jesus and seek to invite people to come to Christ. Not necessarily to come to our churches, but to come to Christ, to follow the way, the truth, and the life that we're following, which ultimately will lead us to the Father and to the new heavens and the new earth, free from sin, free from judgment, free from ultimately the curse of death, for we will live forever with Jesus. But we ought not to try to make the world hate us. We ought to be friendly to people who live in the world, who are living in darkness. And we ought to expect that perhaps the vast majority of people we speak to and interact with will not follow Christ. But that's not on us. That's not on us. That's on them. Their guilt remains. And it's sad, and we should pray for them. That's one thing we should do all the time. We should pray for our neighbors. We should, if we are on the internet, which if you're watching this, you're on the internet. So if you're on the internet, you have email, then I highly recommend that you look up blesseveryhome.com and that you look into subscribing to the idea of getting your neighbors. As you input your address, there's no cost, there's no fear of junk mail if you input your address and choose if you want to have the number of addresses sent to you. They will send them to you. They'll send them to you every day, 5 days a week, 6 days a week, 7 days a week, whatever you choose. And you can then be praying for your neighbors. And we should be praying for our neighbors. And we should be welcoming to our neighbors. And we should not be judgmental towards our neighbors. And we should be faithful to Christ and be the witnesses, testifying to what we've experienced with Christ to our neighbors until Jesus comes. That's what I have for you today, this video. In our next video, we're going to start with the last couple of verses in chapter 15 and move right into chapter 16 because it's one unit of thought. And we'll see you then. God bless your day.